Hey guys, I am back talking about week 15, talking about one of my favorite subjects today. Possibly my favorite of season one, we'll see. But I'm talking about stars today. We're talking about stars. And like I kind of showed you in the beginning of the second sort of half, they were placed there for signs and seasons. So the sun, the moon, the stars is coming out of Genesis, all placed there for signs and seasons, which obviously, near and dear to my heart. So we obviously, depending on where we live in the country, in the universe, not the universe, in the, on the earth, in the world, we may or may not see a lot of stars. Here in Jersey, we don't get a lot. I will tell you that. In some places in New Jersey, you can see them, but where I live in New Jersey, not so much. You get a few, you get the major ones. But we have a lot, and I don't think that we realize it, of like subliminal star messages. Because if we look at flags, for an example, right? Stars and stripes. The United States has 13 stars on its, this isn't flags with Sheldon and Amy, so we're not getting into flags. But if you, are familiar at all with our nation's standard, our country's flag, it's stars and stripes, right? And the stars are symbolic of the 13 colonies. So stars are kind of subliminally always around. I don't think we really are aware of the extent that they actually matter to us, because we look up at them and we're like, oh, hey, stars. Some people who are more like, I don't want to say like witchy or in tune or elemental, people who believe in chakra work, healing work of that nature, they kind of ascribe a lot to like what sign you're born under, right? They're literally like zodiac signs, legitimate signs, right? Coming from the stars. And a lot of people can be categorized, like depending on what your sign is, your star sign, right? Depending on what your star sign is, you might be, I don't know, more of a calm disposition, more of a fiery, disposition. You might be kind of grounded if you're an earth sign. So people often are like, oh, don't blame things on your horoscope, or, don't believe in astrology. And to some degree, take everything maybe with a grain of salt. But on the other hand, there is a divine witness in the sky. I will just say that. So I have way too many books on things that have to do with the zodiac, right? So like The Glory of the Stars, right? Where you can actually see the whole book is dedicated to zodiacs and stars and things in the sky. The Witness of the Stars, right? So there have been books, I picked the ones that are I think the best, but there have been books published for a very long time and research done for a very long time on the importance of the zodiac in the sky and the stars and what they stand for. So get ready for this. So I haven't even talked about what stars kind of symbolize yet. Just need this background out there. I told you this is a great lesson. So, in the sky, okay, get ready. In the sky, the Bible is written in the stars. Right. I know. We're like, So actually, the whole biblical story, and again, remember, history is really just his story, right? Like God's story, the son of God's story. So that's kind of what the Bible breaks down to. It's not it seems like this like all impressive book, and it absolutely is. But really at the end of the day, it's just a story about a family. It's like pre-lineage to Christ, from Adam to the actual moment in time where Christ is coming down, and then like how to spread the word about Christ after. That's really kind of all it is. I mean, there's more, but we'll leave it at that kind of surface level. So the Bible is actually in the sky. So Virgo is the first constellation we want to focus on. Virgo is obviously the Virgin. The Virgin is the prophecy of the promised seed, right? So you want to be very careful. In 2012, I think it was, Virgo and Saturn were the closest they've ever been. And that's actually very telling prophetically, because what ends up happening is that Saturn is Satan's planet. Saturnus is Satan's planet. And so Satan is very close to the Virgin, to Virgo. And as you probably maybe picked up a little, I don't want to get too biblical on you, but you've picked up, I hope, was that there was a controversy between Jesus and Satan, right? Satan wanting to be Jesus, wanting to be God. So all of our evil comes from Satan. This is why we hate Satan. So when you have Virgo, the Virgin, the prophecy of the promised seed, and you have Satan's planet coming in contact in it, with it, near it, it's always, it's just a sign, just to be aware of things to come, right? Libra is going to be the Redeemer's work. And then Scorpio is the conflict. Scorpion, you get a lot of Scorpion symbology and symbolism in all literary works, all biblical works. This idea that Scorpion, there's so much that goes into Scorpion. It's just, so much. We won't go into it now. And then Sagittarius is this idea of the prophecy fulfilled. And that all has to do, those 4 signs have to do with the Redeemer, which is Christ, right? This is the Bible in the sky I'm going into here. So if you don't really care or believe it, just wait. We'll get to other things. And then we get into, and this isn't me being really smart. This is a really important text, companionship Bible. This is not me being very smart. I just have a lot of reference works and a lot of reference books, because knowledge is power, and we like knowledge and we like power. So, well, not power like that, but being powerfully intelligent. Anyway, so it's all kind of, I don't actually want to get too much into it, but there's a lot of work. There's a lot of information on how this 12, and 12 is important too, the 12 constellations in the sky are sort of prophecy, signs, and the Bible's there. There's also a series that is called Zodiac by Romina Russell. That's an interesting concept. And it came about when the 13th constellation came about, right? Pluto left, and in our lifetime, my lifetime anyway, Pluto left, and Ophiuchus came in, or whatever the 3rd constellation is, and she wrote a whole text, which I think is a really cool 4-book series about, it's a sci-fi, and it's about people living on the constellations and the properties that make up the constellations and what happens when the 13th one comes in. And it's a really interesting read. So the sky is really cool. Stars are really, really cool. And there's obviously so many of them. There is a thing that says somewhere, and I can't remember where it is. It's this idea that there's actually more stars in the sky than there are grains of sand on the earth, which I think is crazy and super magnificent. And we'll talk about sand and seas at a different time, but it's very hard for us to wrap our mind around conceptually. So the stars, stars are a tricky thing because they're kind of infinite, but they're also not. And in this way, we want to be very aware that stars, and we'll talk more about seas, because it's all very intertwined, but stars are actually going to be symbolic a lot of times of people, mostly divine angelic people. But if we're talking about stars, we have to be thinking about people. And the Bible talks a lot about, but all types of things talk a lot about this idea that as innumerable, the people will be as innumerable as the stars in the sky. And if you think about all the people who've ever existed from the beginning of time, we are innumerable. There's a reason why, God is called the Lord of hosts. He hosts a whole bunch of people. And we actually, as people in the flesh, are made up of star particles. We're made up of stardust. This is where science and faith really line up nicely. Actually, in so many places, it's kind of a lie that they're very different. They're really not. They're actually they line up very nicely. And I want to read this from the National Geographic because it's relatively recent research, only 5 years old, but it's talking about astrophysicist Carl Schreber, I'm butchering that, I apologize, and his wife. They wrote this book. They're professors at plenty of places. Anyway, wrote this book called Living with the Stars, How the Human Body is Connected to Life Cycles of the Earth, Planets, and the Stars, which they're absolutely right about, and I'm actually going to read this book. I haven't yet, though. So, our bodies, which we talked about last week, if you read the blog, you will definitely know. If you didn't, it's probably there. But this idea of how our bodies are constantly in a state of decay and regeneration, which we do all the time. Physically, emotionally, we're constantly decaying and then regenerating. It's just 7 years, 7 years, 7 years. Everything's in cycles. Everything's in phases. Physically, emotionally, and also like seasonally, terrestrially, celestially, right? Terra meaning of the earth, celestial meaning of the sky. So the interview starts off like this. Everything we are, and I'm quoting from Iris here, everything we are and everything in the universe and on earth originated from stardust, and it continually floats through us even today. It directly connects us to the universe, rebuilding our bodies over and over again in our lifetimes. All the material, we really didn't realize how impermanent we are, and that our bodies are made of remnants of stars and massive explosions in the galaxies. All the material in our bodies originates from that residual stardust, and it finds its way into plants, and from there into everything we do, etc., etc. So, quite literally, when I say stars are symbolic of people, I also mean stars are literally people. We are literally stars. And I've mentioned this before, but our bodies are approximately 93% like of the elements that make up stardust, which is really cool because we're kind of made up of stars and water, and both of them are symbolic of people, like on larger scale, metaphorically, but also physically. We'll talk again more about waters and seas at a later time because it's also very important. But when we think of stars in any text, you want to first check and see if they're referencing a larger amount of people. This is important because in things like Revelation, which, nobody likes Revelation, right? Even though Revelation means to reveal and uncover. Nobody likes it because it's kind of cryptic and prophecy and prophetic, right? But you see stars mentioned all the time, and you see the seas mentioned all the time. It's metaphoric. It's people, right? So anytime you start to take those moments and you kind of break them down symbolically, you start to get more sense of things. Even in like Matthew 13, there's a moment, I think it's Matthew 13, like 24 or 25, and Jesus is talking, and he's saying about how, the stars will fall from heaven. And that's not literally what he's talking about. He's talking about like angelic divine beings are going to come out of heaven into earth, which I know sounds crazy. I understand that. But nonetheless, but I'll leave that on the shelf. Anyway, stars. So yes, always going to be symbolic of people. But if it's not symbolic of, that's not the only thing, right? That's just the main one that I really wanted to cover, and I took a lot of time doing so. But also, it's going to be enlightenment. It's going to be guidance. It's going to be like dreams or inspiration, right? We look to the North Star for our way home. Peter Pan, I think, is like second star to the right? Because it's like a navigation tool, and it always has been. We use the North Star, we use the stars in the sky. If you have seen Moana, you know that wayfaring will guide you kind of home. And the stars have been in the galaxy, obviously, as long as, well, I actually want to backtrack, because the thing about stars, and why I like that they're symbolic of people, I know I'm jumping back to that, I apologize. I just wanted to make one more point, which is that stars have a life cycle too. So they are born, this is a point I should have made when I was reading, they're born, they're bright, shining brilliantly, twinkle, twinkle, and then they die. And I mean, we probably see it like 500 million light years after it happens. But my point is that even the star cycle, the star life cycle, is like the human life cycle. You know, we shine bright and then we fade. It's also like the seasonal life cycle that I mentioned back in episode 1, maybe, about how, about how spring, summer, fall, winter, and like you're shining brightly in summer and then you start to fade off in fall and then you kind of die out in winter. Star cycles, like life cycles, like seasonal cycles, we have that too. We emulate that. So I think it's stars are such a fascinating study. But as for enlightenment guidance, you know, showing us where we need to go or where we need to be, that's not obviously hard for us. We wrap our mind around that really nicely. Again, this goes back to biblical literature, which is to say that the star guided the 3 wise men to Jesus's birth, right? So a lot of what we read about, this is why the archetypal mythological like lens in fiction is so important, because so much of our kind of widely understood ideas now go all the way back to these older texts. And that's not just Christian texts. You know, there's a whole bunch of texts. It's just the Bible's always the most widely circulated. I think the Bible's been the best-selling book for like the past, I don't even know, 10, 15 years or something. It's always the best because there's so much in it. It's really 66 books. So there's so much to read. Anyway, I didn't want this to be a biblical conversation. Kind of ended up as one, and I apologize for that. But when you're seeing stars, you're knocked out. No, just kidding. But kind of actually. But when you see stars and you're not unconscious and they're not flying around your head like a little cartoon, right? It probably is going to be symbolic of one of a couple things. People, both fleshly people, like physical people, and angelic beings, both. Knowledge, well, inspiration, not so much knowledge, but like inspiration, imagination, guidance, direction, enlightenment. Those are all going to be sort of star symbolism. So, really interesting study when we think of stars. So what do they tell us, right? What is the point, right? Because we always want to take our messages from these celestial body. Well, not just celestial. In the last 3 episodes, celestial. That won't always be the case. What message do the stars have for us, aside from what sign we were born under, right? Which I really do. I know people don't like it, but there is definitely something to where you were born under a sign and which third you were born in, right? Like I'm an Aries and I'm born in the first half or first third of because every sign can be broken into 3. And this is a study I'm not getting into now, but I'm in the first third and my sister's in the second third. And we're vastly different humans. And of course, there's nature and nurture that goes into that. It's not all stars and signs, whatever. But there is definitely something to our star signs. So it is, or our sun signs, technically. So it is worth at least checking into. But again, anyway, what can they tell us outside of our signs and outside of where we were born celestially? Well, we want to always be looking. Well, I think we always want to be looking up, right? Especially in the dark times. When things are dark, we want to be looking up. So we want to look up for inspiration and guidance. But I think it's important. I really think it's important. And as somebody who struggles hard with like being too independent, I'm saying this, right? We need to always be looking for guidance, right? And we always need to be looking for enlightenment. I've been doing a lot of research, as you know, and the hallmark of a good leader is a perpetual learner, right? And when you're perpetually learning, it means you're constantly looking for guidance and you're constantly looking for enlightenment and wisdom in places. And I think the stars are a really good indicator of that. You know, the worst thing you can do is be stagnant. That's where like breeding for disease comes. Like if you think ponds, right? Stagnant waters, nothing grows there. Nothing good grows there. And so the stars, I think, are a good sign to like look up when it's dark, always look for guidance, and always look for that kind of enlightenment. Always look for that for your dreams. You know, those are the things that I think you really want to get when you're looking up at the stars. Not just like, oh, how pretty, or like how magnificent, or wow, how small am I, right? I think we do that a lot. But I want us to kind of get that message of, you know, ask for help, ask for guidance from someone who can actually give you guidance. We'll talk more about this at another point this week, but get a guidance in the right places, right? Like, don't take this dying star when you've got the North Star, right? Find your North Star, find your true north. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about compass points in another couple weeks. But anyway, so the stars, very important. Look up. Remember, we need guidance. We need dreams. We need to look up in times of sadness. And there's just so much that we can learn from the study of stars. So anytime you see them, or anytime you see it in literature, you definitely want to make a note of it. Really interesting study. I will catch you guys here next time. Subscribe if you like what you're listening to. Don't forget that we are on, I'm everywhere now, right? TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, obviously the podcast. So find us. We're everywhere. We're bringing different messages, but this week it's all about stars. And do not forget, you're a star. Isn't that nice?